When my neighbor Brenda Whitman marched up to my front door with her perfectly manicured nails clutching a stack of HOA violation notices, she had no idea she was about to trigger the most expensive mistake of her entire suburban life. What started as her petty complaint about my vegetable garden would end up costing her more money than she'd see in 5 years of her part-time real estate job. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Helen Rodriguez, and until 3 months ago, I thought the worst thing about living in Willow Creek Estates was the monthly HOA fee. I moved into this planned community in Phoenix, Arizona after my divorce was finalized. The house on Maple Ridge Drive seemed perfect, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a decent-sized backyard that faced east, getting beautiful morning sun. The HOA president, Marcus Chen, had been welcoming during my initial walkthrough, explaining that the community valued harmonious living and property value preservation. What he didn't mention was that Brenda Whitman, my next-door neighbor, had appointed herself as the unofficial enforcer of every single neighborhood rule, written or imagined. Brenda lived in the larger colonial-style house directly to my right. She was in her mid-50s, divorced herself, and worked part-time showing houses for Pinnacle Realty. Her own yard was a monument to suburban conformity, perfectly edged St. Augustine grass, symmetrical rose bushes, and those generic flowering shrubs that looked like they came straight from a home improvement store catalog. Everything was beige, cream, or that particular shade of dusty pink that screams safe suburban choice. My first interaction with Brenda happened during my second week in the neighborhood. I was unloading groceries when she appeared at the property line, wearing a crisp white tennis outfit despite it being barely 7 a.m. "You must be the new owner," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm Brenda Whitman. I've been living here for 8 years, so I know all the community standards. Just so you're aware, the HOA has very specific guidelines about lawn maintenance. Grass should be cut weekly during the growing season, and any landscaping changes need pre-approval." I thanked her for the information, thinking it was neighborly advice. How naive I was. The problem started when I decided to plant my garden. After spending most of my adult life in apartments, I was thrilled to finally have outdoor space. I'd always dreamed of growing my own vegetables. There's something deeply satisfying about eating tomatoes you've nurtured from seeds. So I researched extensively, chose the perfect spot in my backyard that got 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight, and planned a modest 12 by 8-foot vegetable garden. I carefully reviewed the HOA covenant documents. The rules about landscaping were surprisingly vague. They mentioned maintaining property values and avoiding unsightly installations, but nothing specifically prohibited vegetable gardens. I even called the HOA management company, Sunset Community Services, and spoke with their representative, Janet Mills. She confirmed that vegetable gardens weren't explicitly forbidden as long as they were neat and well-maintained. Feeling confident, I spent a weekend in early March preparing the soil. I rented a rototiller, added compost, and created neat raised rows. I planted tomatoes, bell peppers, lettuce, carrots, and herbs, nothing exotic or unruly. I even installed a small drip irrigation system to keep everything perfectly watered. The whole setup looked professional and organized. For the first month, everything was wonderful. My seedlings sprouted beautifully, and I spent peaceful mornings tending to them before work. Several neighbors complimented the garden during their evening walks. Mrs. Patterson from across the street said it reminded her of her grandmother's victory garden. Even Marcus Chen mentioned that it looked very well organized when he walked his golden retriever past my house. But Brenda was watching. Always watching. The complaints started subtly. She'd make comments about unusual landscaping choices when we crossed paths at the mailbox. She'd mention how some people didn't understand that neighborhoods had standards to maintain. I tried to ignore her passive-aggressive remarks, focusing instead on my thriving plants. Then came the morning in late April when everything changed. I was watering my tomatoes, which were already showing promising little green fruits, when I heard Brenda's sliding door slam shut with unnecessary force. Moments later, she appeared at our shared fence line, her face flushed with indignation. "This has gone too far, Helen," she announced, waving her phone in my direction.
I've been documenting this farm situation you've created, and I'm filing a formal complaint with the HOA today. I set down my watering can and walked over to the fence. What exactly is the problem, Brenda? The garden is neat, it's well maintained, and I checked with the HOA before planting anything. The problem, she said, her voice rising, is that this isn't a rural farming community. This is Willow Creek Estates, a premium residential neighborhood. Vegetable gardens belong in backyards in the country, not in upscale communities where people are trying to maintain property values. But there's nothing in the HOA rules that prohibits vegetable gardens, I replied calmly.
Brenda's laugh was sharp and humorless. You obviously don't understand how these things work. The covenant clearly states that all landscaping must maintain community standards and property values. Your little farm plot is bringing down the entire neighborhood's value. I sell real estate, Helen. I know what buyers want, and I can guarantee you it's not looking at vegetable gardens when they're touring homes. Have you actually had any buyers complain? I asked. That's not the point. The point is prevention. By the time buyers start complaining, the damage is already done. She held up her phone again. I've taken photos from every angle, and I'm sending them to Marcus Chen today along with my formal complaint. This garden needs to go. I felt my patience wearing thin, but I kept my voice level. Brenda, I have every right to garden on my own property within the HOA guidelines. If you want to file a complaint, that's your choice, but I'm not removing a perfectly legal garden because you personally don't like it. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. I've been in this neighborhood a lot longer than you have, and I know how things work around here. Marcus and the board listen to established residents who understand community standards. After she stormed back into her house, I stood there looking at my healthy, thriving plants. The tomatoes were getting bigger every day, the pepper plants were flowering, and my lettuce was producing beautiful, crisp leaves. The garden was genuinely attractive, organized, weed-free, and obviously cared for. I couldn't understand how anyone could see it as a problem. But I knew Brenda wasn't bluffing. She would absolutely file that complaint. And given her history in the neighborhood, there was a chance the HOA board might side with her. I needed to be prepared. That afternoon, I called Janet Mills at Sunset Community Services again, explaining the situation. She assured me that she'd review my case carefully when the complaint came in, but warned me that neighbor disputes could get complicated. She suggested I document everything: photos of the garden, records of my research into the HOA rules, and any communications with neighbors. I also decided to do something Brenda clearly hadn't thought about. I contacted a local real estate appraiser to get a professional opinion on how vegetable gardens actually affect property values. If she was going to base her complaint on property values, I wanted facts to back up my position. What I discovered over the next few days would turn this entire situation upside down in ways that Brenda never saw coming. The research I conducted over the following week completely changed my understanding of the situation. I contacted Rebecca Correz, a certified residential appraiser who'd been working in the Phoenix area for over 15 years. When I explained my situation, she was immediately interested.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Vegetable gardens are actually becoming a significant selling point, Rebecca told me during our phone consultation, especially well-maintained ones like you're describing. Buyers today are increasingly interested in sustainable living, organic food production, and properties that offer lifestyle benefits beyond just square footage. She agreed to conduct an informal assessment of how my garden might impact property values in Willow Creek Estates. Meanwhile, I also reached out to David Kim, a local real estate agent who specialized in planned communities. His response was even more encouraging. In today's market, unique features that suggest self-sufficiency and outdoor living are huge advantages, David explained. A professional-looking vegetable garden can easily add $3,000 to $5,000 to a property's perceived value, sometimes more if it's particularly well-designed. Armed with this preliminary information, I felt more confident about facing whatever complaint Brenda was preparing. But I also decided to take a more proactive approach. If this was going to become a formal HOA matter, I wanted to understand exactly who I was dealing with. I started by reviewing the HOA board meeting minutes from the past 2 years, which were available online through the Sunset Community Services portal. What I discovered was illuminating. Brenda Whitman had filed complaints against neighbors 17 times in the past 18 months. Her grievances ranged from holiday decorations being left up too long, 3 days after New Year's, to children's bicycles being stored improperly in driveways. Most telling was a complaint she'd filed against the Martinez family 6 months earlier. They'd installed a small fountain in their front yard, something that was explicitly permitted under HOA guidelines. Brenda had argued that the sound of running water was disruptive and that fountains were inappropriate for the community aesthetic. The HOA board had dismissed her complaint unanimously, with Marcus Chen noting in the minutes that Miss Whitman's concerns did not align with actual covenant violations. I also learned something interesting about Brenda's real estate career. Using public records and online searches, I discovered that she'd sold exactly 4 houses in the past year, well below the average for even part-time agents in our area. Her client reviews on Realtor.com were mixed at best, with several mentioning her rigid personality and unrealistic expectations about buyer preferences. The formal complaint arrived exactly 1 week after our fence line confrontation. Marcus Chen called me personally to schedule a hearing with the HOA board, which would take place the following Thursday evening at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. He sounded apologetic about the situation. "Helen, I want you to know that the board takes all complaints seriously, but we also believe in being fair to all residents," he said. "Please prepare any documentation you feel supports your position. We'll review everything carefully." I spent the next few days preparing my defense like I was going to trial. I printed photos of my garden from multiple angles, showing how neat and well organized it appeared. I compiled the original HOA covenant documents with the relevant sections highlighted. I gathered my correspondence with Janet Mills, confirming that vegetable gardens weren't prohibited. Most importantly, I prepared Rebecca Torres's preliminary property value assessment. The night before the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson from across the street knocked on my door around 6 p.m. carrying a plate of homemade cookies. "I heard about this ridiculous complaint Brenda filed," she said, settling into my kitchen chair. "I wanted you to know that several of us neighbors think your garden is lovely. In fact, I was hoping you might share some growing tips. I haven't had a successful tomato plant in years." Mrs. Patterson, whose full name was Dorothy, had lived in Willow Creek Estates since the community was first built 12 years earlier. She had a perspective on neighborhood dynamics that proved invaluable. "Brenda's been causing problems since she moved here," Dorothy explained. "She seems to think being a real estate agent gives her some kind of authority on property values, but frankly, most of us think she doesn't know what she's talking about. Did you know she tried to get the HOA to ban children's chalk drawings on driveways last summer? She claimed they were temporary graffiti that would deter buyers." Dorothy also revealed that Brenda had been struggling financially since her divorce 2 years earlier. She's desperate to sell her house and move to a smaller place, but it's been on and off the market for 8 months. Instead of looking at her own issues, like that awful pink and beige color scheme and her completely dead backyard, she's decided that everyone else's property choices are the problem. This information added a new dimension to my understanding of Brenda's motivations. She wasn't just being a difficult neighbor, she was projecting her own real estate frustrations onto others. The hearing took place in the community clubhouse's meeting room. The HOA board consisted of 5 members, Marcus Chen as president, Sandra Williams as vice president, Robert Jackson as treasurer, Lisa Murphy as secretary, and James Thompson as member at large. They sat at a long table facing chairs arranged for residents. Brenda arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a thick folder and wearing what I assumed was her most professional real estate outfit, a navy blue blazer and matching skirt that looked like she'd borrowed it from 1995. She'd clearly prepared expensively, spreading documents across the table in front of her.
I arrived with my own folder, but I'd also brought something extra, a small basket filled with vegetables from my garden. Fresh tomatoes, crisp lettuce, colorful bell peppers, and fragrant herbs. I figured if we were going to discuss the garden's impact on community standards, the board should see the actual results. Marcus Chen called the meeting to order and explained the process.
Brenda would present her complaint first, then I'd have an opportunity to respond. The board would ask questions, and then they'd deliberate. Brenda's presentation lasted nearly 20 minutes. She'd prepared a PowerPoint slideshow that she displayed on her laptop, complete with photos of my garden taken from various angles and distances. Her main arguments focused on 3 points. The garden violated community aesthetic standards, it would negatively impact property values, and it set a dangerous precedent for other residents who might want to install agricultural installations in their yards. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, she concluded, we moved to Willow Creek Estates because it represents a certain quality of suburban living. When residents start turning their yards into vegetable farms, we're essentially transforming our community into something it was never intended to be. This isn't about personal preferences, it's about protecting the investment we've all made in our homes. Her presentation was polished and professional, but I noticed several board members exchanging glances during her more dramatic statements about agricultural installations and suburban farming transformations. When my turn came, I started with the vegetables. I passed the basket around the table, letting each board member see and smell the fresh produce. This is what we're actually talking about, I said simply. These vegetables grew in a 12 by 8 foot area that represents less than 2% of my total backyard space. They're healthy, they're beautiful, and they're completely within HOA guidelines. I then presented my documentation systematically. The covenant research, Janet Mills's confirmation, photos showing the garden's neat appearance, and testimonials from supportive neighbors. But the centerpiece of my presentation was Rebecca Torres's property value assessment. According to certified appraiser Rebecca Torres, a well-maintained vegetable garden like mine doesn't decrease property values, I explained, distributing copies of her written assessment. In fact, current market trends suggest it could increase values by $3,000 to $5,000 for properties in communities like ours. The room went completely silent. Brenda's face went pale, then red, then pale again. Marcus Chen studied the assessment carefully before passing it to Sandra Williams. Ms. Rodriguez, Robert Jackson asked, this assessment suggests that vegetable gardens are actually desirable features for today's buyers. Is that accurate? According to multiple real estate professionals I consulted, yes. Buyers today value sustainable living features, outdoor lifestyle amenities, and properties that offer practical benefits beyond just living space. Sandra Williams raised her hand. Ms. Whitman, you mentioned in your complaint that vegetable gardens hurt property values because of your experience in real estate. Do you have any specific data or professional assessments that support this claim? Brenda fumbled through her folder. Well, no, I don't have formal assessments, but I've been selling real estate for several years, and I know what buyers respond to. How many homes have you sold this year? James Thompson asked. The question hung in the air like a blade. Brenda's professional credibility, the foundation of her entire complaint, was being directly challenged. What happened next would determine not just the fate of my garden, but the entire trajectory of this neighborhood conflict. Brenda's face flushed crimson as James Thompson's question about her sales record hung in the air. She shuffled through her papers, clearly stalling for time. Well, the market has been challenging this year, she stammered, but my experience goes beyond just this year's numbers. I understand buyer psychology and community standards. Sandra Williams leaned forward. Ms. Whitman, could you provide a specific number? How many homes have you actually sold in the past 12 months? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Brenda mumbled, 4 properties. Robert Jackson consulted something on his tablet. According to the Phoenix Association of Realtors, the average agent in our area sells 18 to 24 homes per year, even working part-time. 4 sales would place you in the bottom 5% of active agents. The devastating precision of that statistic hit the room like a thunderclap. Brenda's entire credibility as a real estate expert, the foundation she'd built her complaint on, crumbled in an instant. Marcus Chen cleared his throat diplomatically. Let's focus on the specific covenant issues. Ms. Rodriguez, your documentation appears thorough. The professional property assessment is particularly relevant. He turned to the other board members. Does anyone have additional questions before we deliberate?
Lisa Murphy raised her hand. I'd like to address the precedent concern Miss Whitman raised. If we approve Miss Rodriguez's garden, are we opening the door to unlimited agricultural activities? I'd anticipated this question. The key distinction is scale and purpose. My garden occupies 96 square feet in a backyard that's over 4,000 square feet total. It's designed for personal use, not commercial production. The HOA could easily establish reasonable guidelines about size, location, and maintenance standards if they're concerned about future requests. That's actually an excellent point, Marcus said, making notes. We could develop specific language for the covenants that protects residents' rights to reasonable gardening while preventing any truly problematic installations. James Thompson nodded. It seems like this situation has highlighted a gap in our current covenant language rather than revealing an actual violation. After 30 minutes of questions and discussion, the board asked both Brenda and me to step outside while they deliberated. We sat in uncomfortable silence in the clubhouse lobby. Brenda kept checking her phone and adjusting her blazer, while I tried to read a community newsletter that was months out of date. 20 minutes later, Marcus Chen called us back in. The board members' faces were neutral, giving away nothing about their decision. After careful review of all documentation and testimony, Marcus announced, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Miss Rodriguez's vegetable garden does not violate any existing HOA covenants. The garden appears well-maintained, appropriately scaled, and actually enhances rather than detracts from community standards. Miss Whitman's complaint is dismissed. Relief flooded through me, but Marcus wasn't finished. Furthermore, the board recognizes that this situation has revealed ambiguity in our current covenant language regarding landscaping and gardening. We will be forming a committee to develop clearer guidelines that protects residents' reasonable rights to garden while maintaining community standards. We invite any interested residents to participate in this process. Brenda stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're setting a dangerous precedent that will hurt everyone's property values. I hope you're prepared to explain to homeowners why their investments are declining because of your poor judgment. Miss Whitman, Sandra Williams said firmly, we based our decision on professional property assessments, not personal opinions. The evidence suggests that well-maintained gardens actually enhance property values. Brenda stormed out without another word, leaving her folder of documents scattered across the table. After the meeting, several board members congratulated me and expressed interest in seeing my garden in person. Dorothy Patterson, who had attended as a community observer, walked me to my car. That was beautiful, she said, grinning. I haven't seen Brenda get her comeuppance like Pat in years. 4 house sales. No wonder she's been so bitter about everyone else's property choices. I thought the drama was over. I was spectacularly wrong. The next morning, I woke to find 3 of my tomato plants had been cut down during the night. Not pulled up or damaged by animals, cleanly cut with garden shears about 2 inches above the soil line. My beautiful Cherokee purple tomatoes, which had been just days away from ripening, were destroyed. I immediately called the non-emergency police line to report the vandalism. Officer Maria Santos arrived within an hour, photographed the damage, and took my statement. When I mentioned the HOA hearing the previous night, her expression grew serious. Do you have any direct evidence that Miss Whitman was involved? She asked. No direct evidence, but the timing is pretty suspicious. These plants were perfectly healthy yesterday evening. Officer Santos nodded. We'll document this as property damage and vandalism. I recommend installing a security camera if you don't already have one. Sometimes these neighbor disputes escalate, and video evidence can be crucial. I spent that afternoon at the hardware store, purchasing a wireless security camera system with night vision capabilities. The young clerk, Tyler, helped me select cameras that would cover my backyard without invading my neighbor's privacy. You'd be amazed how often we sell these because of neighbor problems, Tyler told me. Ring doorbells and backyard cameras are our biggest sellers after people have disputes. Smart move getting them installed quickly. That evening, I was installing the cameras when Dorothy Patterson appeared at my back gate. I heard about your tomatoes, she said, shaking her head sadly. That's just vindictive. I brought you some starter plants from my greenhouse, Cherokee purples, just like the ones that were destroyed.
They're a little smaller, but they should still produce before the first frost. As we replanted the damaged area, Dorothy shared more insights about Brenda's situation.
She's gotten 3 price reductions on her house in the past month, Dorothy explained. It's been listed at $485,000, then $465,000, then $445,000. Now it's down to $425,000 and still not selling. Her realtor, ironically, someone from a competing agency, told me they're struggling because the house feels outdated and the backyard is basically dead space. Dead space? Nothing but brown grass and those awful generic shrubs. No character, no lifestyle appeal. Meanwhile, your garden makes your property look vibrant and lived in. If I were a buyer touring this neighborhood, I'd much rather see your backyard than hers. The cameras proved their worth 3 nights later. At 2:47 a.m., the motion sensors triggered, capturing crystal clear footage of someone in a dark hoodie creeping through my backyard. The person spent nearly 10 minutes examining my garden before ultimately deciding not to damage anything, perhaps deterred by the obvious presence of the cameras. While the footage wasn't clear enough to definitively identify the intruder, the build and movements looked suspiciously familiar. I forwarded the video to Officer Santos, who confirmed they were investigating. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rebecca Torres, the appraiser who'd done my initial property assessment, called with interesting news. "Helen, I hope you don't mind, but your situation got me curious about the broader neighborhood. I pulled recent sales data for Willow Creek Estates, and the results are fascinating." She explained that she'd analyzed property sales from the past 2 years, comparing homes with unique landscaping features to those with standard suburban yards. The data was striking. Properties with distinctive outdoor features, gardens, water features, outdoor kitchens, or unique plantings, sold for an average of 4.2% above comparable properties with standard landscaping. In your neighborhood, that translates to roughly $18,000 to $22,000 in additional value. Even more interesting was her analysis of Brenda's specific property. I looked up the listing for 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, I assume that's your neighbor's house. Based on comparable sales and current market conditions, it should be selling in the $440,000 to $450,000 range. The fact that it's not moving after multiple price reductions suggests there are specific issues with the property or its presentation. What kind of issues? Usually it's about lifestyle appeal. Buyers today want properties that offer more than just square footage. They want outdoor living spaces, sustainable features, or unique character elements. A backyard that's just grass and basic shrubs doesn't compete well against properties that offer gardening potential, entertaining spaces, or distinctive landscaping. This information gave me an idea that would completely change the dynamics of my conflict with Brenda. Instead of simply defending my garden, I was about to go on the offensive in a way she never saw coming. 2 days later, I did something that shocked everyone in Willow Creek Estates, including myself. I called Brenda directly and asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss a business proposition. Her suspicious voice on the phone was priceless. What kind of business proposition? "The kind that might help both of us," I replied mysteriously. "Starbucks on Desert Ridge Parkway, tomorrow at 2 p.m.? After a long pause, she agreed. What I had planned for that coffee meeting would either resolve our conflict permanently or escalate it beyond anything our quiet suburban neighborhood had ever seen. The Starbucks on Desert Ridge Parkway was busy with the typical Tuesday afternoon crowd: remote workers with laptops, mothers with strollers, and teenagers escaping the Arizona heat. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table where we could talk privately. I'd brought a folder, but this time it contained something entirely different from legal documents or property assessments. Brenda walked in precisely at 2 p.m., wearing dark sunglasses despite being indoors and carrying her oversized designer purse like a shield. She looked around nervously before spotting me, then approached with the cautious steps of someone expecting an ambush. "Helen," she said stiffly, settling into the chair across from me, "I have to admit, I'm curious about this business proposition.
Though after everything that's happened, I'm not sure what we could possibly have to discuss. I slid a printed photograph across the table. It showed her backyard, taken from the second floor of Dorothy Patterson's house with permission. The image was stark: brown patches in the grass, overgrown shrubs, a cracked concrete patio, and absolutely nothing that suggested outdoor living or lifestyle appeal. "This is why your house isn't selling," I said simply. Brenda's face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "How did you get this photo?" "That's not important. What's important is that you've been blaming my garden for property value problems while ignoring the real issue with your own property. You've dropped your price $60,000 in 8 months, and you're still not getting offers. Want to know why?"
She sat back in her chair, arms crossed defensively. I'm listening. I opened my folder and pulled out Rebecca Torres's expanded market analysis. Professional appraisers and real estate agents agree. Buyers today want outdoor spaces that offer lifestyle benefits. Your backyard looks like a maintenance headache, not a place where families would want to spend time. So, what are you suggesting? Should I install a vegetable garden like yours? Actually, yes, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. The silence stretched between us as Brenda processed this unexpected turn. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were tired and stressed. You want to help me sell my house after I tried to get your garden removed and… She trailed off, probably remembering the mysteriously cut tomato plants. Here's what I know about you, Brenda. You're struggling financially since your divorce. Your real estate career isn't going well, partly because you don't understand current market trends. Your house has been on the market for 8 months with multiple price reductions. You're probably facing pressure from your mortgage company, and you desperately need to move to something more affordable. Her face went pale. How do you… Public records, real estate listings, basic observation. The question is whether you want to keep fighting with neighbors and blaming everyone else for your problems, or whether you want to actually solve them. I pulled out another document, a detailed plan I'd spent hours preparing. This is a backyard transformation proposal specifically designed for your property. Native Arizona plants that require minimal water, raised garden beds for vegetables and herbs, a small seating area with pavers, and strategic lighting for evening appeal. Total cost, approximately $3,500. Potential increase in property value, $15,000 to $20,000. Brenda studied the plan, her real estate training kicking in despite her personal feelings. You really think this would make that much difference? I think it would transform your property from just another suburban house into the house with the amazing backyard. In today's market, that's the difference between selling and sitting. She looked up from the papers. Why would you help me after everything I've put you through? I'd been expecting this question. Because I'm not interested in having a neighbor who resents me for the next many years, because your financial stress is probably driving a lot of your behavior, and solving that benefits everyone, and because I genuinely believe this could work. What's in it for you? Peace, an end to this conflict, and honestly, the satisfaction of proving that gardens actually help property values instead of hurting them. Brenda was quiet for several minutes, studying the transformation plan. I could see her mental calculations, the cost versus the potential return, the timeline, the risk of trying something new versus the certainty of continued failure with her current approach. "You'd really help me install all this?" she asked finally. "I'd consult on the design and help with the initial installation. I know which plants well in our soil, where to get quality materials affordably, and how to create something that looks professional without breaking the budget." "And in return?" "You stop filing HOA complaints about my garden. You acknowledge publicly that gardens can enhance property values. And if this works, when it works, you use your real estate background to help other neighbors understand how outdoor improvements can benefit the entire community." She laughed bitterly. "My real estate background? Helen, you heard what they said at that HOA meeting. I've sold 4 houses this year. I'm barely hanging on in this business."
Then this is your chance to learn something new, to understand what buyers actually want instead of what you think they should want, to turn your personal transformation into professional credibility. I could see her wavering, so I played my final card. Brenda, in 6 months, you could be living in a smaller, more affordable home with a check in the bank from selling your current house at full market value. Your stress level drops, your financial pressure eases, and you have a success story that could jumpstart your real estate career. Or you can keep doing what you're doing and hope for different results. She stared at the transformation plan for another long moment. When would we start? This weekend, if you're serious. The key is moving fast so you can get the house back on the market before the fall buying season ends. What if it doesn't work? What if I spend $3,500 and still can't sell?
Then you'll have a beautiful backyard that you can enjoy until you do sell, and you'll have learned something valuable about current market preferences. But Brenda, I've done the research. This approach works. She folded the papers slowly. I need to think about this. Of course, but don't think too long. Every week your house sits on the market and costs you money in mortgage payments, utilities, and opportunity cost. And the sooner we start, the sooner you can get back on the market with a competitive advantage. As we gathered our things to leave, Brenda looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Helen, can I ask you something? That night when my tomato plants were cut, did you have anything to do with that? I met her eyes directly. No, Brenda, I would never damage someone else's property, no matter how angry I was. But I do have security cameras now, and I did capture footage of someone in my backyard a few nights later. The police have that video. Her face went white. Oh. Whoever cut those plants made a serious mistake. Property destruction is a crime, and it escalated this situation unnecessarily. I hope it doesn't happen again. We walked to our cars in uncomfortable silence. As I was unlocking my door, Brenda called out, Helen, if we do this, if I agree to your plan, how do I know you're not just setting me up for some kind of revenge? I turned to face her. Because revenge would be letting you keep failing while I succeed. Helping you succeed proves my point much more effectively than watching you fail. She nodded slowly, processing this logic. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision, she said finally. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I'd just offered to help the person who'd tried to destroy my garden and had probably vandalized my property. Either I was about to solve this conflict in the most unexpected way possible, or I was walking into a trap that would make everything much worse. But I had a feeling that Brenda Whitman was about to surprise everyone in Willow Creek Estates, including herself. Brenda's call came at 7:23 a.m. the next morning, waking me from a deep sleep. Her voice was strained but determined. Helen, I've been up all night thinking about your proposal. I want to do it. When can we start? I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Are you sure? This is going to require a significant time commitment and some financial investment. I'm sure. I looked at my bank statements last night and I can't afford not to try something different. My mortgage payment is $2,847 a month, plus utilities and maintenance. Every month this house doesn't sell costs me nearly $4,000 in carrying costs alone. The desperation in her voice was painful to hear, but it also meant she was finally ready to take action instead of just complaining about everyone else. Okay, I said, already mentally organizing the project timeline. Meet me at Home Depot on Cave Creek Road at 9 a.m. Wear old clothes and bring work gloves. We're starting with soil preparation. When I arrived at Home Depot, I found Brenda standing uncertainly near the garden center entrance, wearing pristine white sneakers and a spotless pink tank top that screamed, "I've never done yard work in my life." First lesson, I said, leading her toward the soil amendments aisle. Successful gardening starts with good soil. Your backyard has Arizona caliche clay, which is basically concrete when dry and swamp when wet. We need to fix that before we plant anything. Over the next hour, I explained the basics of soil amendment, plant selection for desert climates, and water-efficient irrigation. Brenda took notes on her phone like she was studying for a real estate exam, asking surprisingly thoughtful questions about maintenance requirements and seasonal changes. The key, I explained, while we loaded bags of compost into her SUV,
is choosing plants that want to live here. Fighting the desert climate is expensive and time-consuming. Working with it creates beautiful, low-maintenance landscapes that buyers love. Our first stop back at her house was clearing out the existing disaster. Her backyard was worse up close than it had appeared in photographs. The grass was patchy and brown, choked with weeds. The concrete patio had multiple cracks, and several of the generic shrubs were clearly dead or dying. "How long has your yard looked like this?" I asked, pulling on work gloves. Brenda looked embarrassed. "Since the divorce, honestly. Mark used to handle all the yard work, and after he moved out, I just ignored it. I kept thinking I'd hire a landscaping service, but money got tight, and then it seemed too overwhelming to deal with."
We spent the morning ripping out dead plants and clearing weeds. Brenda worked harder than I'd expected, though she complained frequently about the heat, the dirt under her fingernails, and the thorns on various desert plants. "Why didn't anyone tell me that buying a house meant this much physical labor?" she groaned, wrestling with a particularly stubborn shrub root. "Because most people hire professionals or do it gradually over time," I replied, using a shovel to help her extract the root. "You're trying to transform an entire backyard in a few weeks. It's going to be intense." By lunch, we'd cleared roughly half the space and filled Brenda's garbage bins with dead plants and debris. We sat on her cracked patio, drinking water and surveying our progress. "I can't believe how much better it looks already," Brenda admitted. "Just getting rid of the dead stuff makes a huge difference." That afternoon, we tackled soil preparation. I showed Brenda how to use a rototiller, though she nearly launched herself backward when it first engaged. "This thing has a mind of its own," she shouted over the engine noise. "It takes practice," I called back. "Keep a firm grip and let the machine do the work. Don't fight it." After 3 hours of tilling and soil amendment, we had 6 raised beds ready for planting. Brenda was covered in dirt, her perfect manicure was destroyed, and she looked exhausted. But there was something different in her expression, a satisfaction I hadn't seen before. "Tomorrow we plant," I announced. "I've already ordered the plants we discussed. They'll be delivered in the morning." "Helen," Brenda said as we cleaned our tools, "can I ask you something? Why are you really doing this? I mean, beyond what you said yesterday about wanting peace in the neighborhood." I considered her question carefully. "Honestly, because I think you're capable of more than you've been showing. You've been so focused on what everyone else is doing wrong that you haven't had energy to focus on what you could do right. This project forces you to be constructive instead of destructive." She nodded slowly. "My therapist has been telling me something similar, that I've been projecting my frustrations onto other people instead of dealing with my actual problems." "Are you seeing someone about the divorce stress?" "Yeah, Dr. Sarah Coleman. She's been helping me work through the anger and financial anxiety. She actually encouraged me to find a project that would give me some sense of control over my situation." This explained a lot about Brenda's recent behavior. Divorce, financial pressure, and career struggles would make anyone defensive and prone to conflict. The next morning brought a delivery truck filled with desert-adapted plants, Palo Verde saplings, desert marigolds, fairy duster shrubs, ghost plants, and various herbs that could handle Arizona heat. I also had special-ordered heritage tomato seedlings and pepper plants, similar to what I grew in my own garden. "These look so much more interesting than what I had before," Brenda observed, examining a silvery-leafed desert sage plant. "I never realized there were so many beautiful options for desert landscaping." We spent the day planting, with me teaching Brenda proper techniques for spacing, depth, and watering. She was a surprisingly quick learner once she stopped overthinking every decision. "The key to desert gardening," I explained while demonstrating proper mulching technique, "is creating microclimates. These rocks will absorb heat during the day and release them slowly at night, protecting the plants. The mulch conserves moisture and prevents weeds." By mid-afternoon, the transformation was dramatic. Where there had been brown grass and dying shrubs, there were now organized beds filled with diverse, healthy plants.
The vegetable section looked particularly impressive, neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that would provide both visual appeal and practical benefits. But the real magic happened when we installed the simple drip irrigation system I'd designed. Suddenly, the entire space looked professional and intentional. "This is incredible," Brenda said, standing back to admire our work. "It looks like a home where people actually live and enjoy their outdoor space," I corrected. "That's what buyers want to see." That evening, Dorothy Patterson appeared at Brenda's back gate with a bottle of wine and genuine amazement on her face. "I cannot believe this is the same yard," she declared. "Brenda, this is absolutely beautiful. You should be so proud." For the first time since I'd known her, Brenda smiled genuinely. Helen did most of the work. I just followed instructions and tried not to kill anything.
Don't undersell yourself, I said. You put in 12 hours of physical labor over 2 days. This wouldn't have happened without your commitment. Dorothy raised her wine glass. To unexpected transformations and new beginnings. As we toasted, I felt optimistic about how this story would end, but I had no idea that the real test was still coming, and it would arrive in the form of someone neither Brenda nor I had expected to enter our neighborhood drama. The next morning, a silver BMW pulled into Brenda's driveway, and out stepped a woman in an expensive suit carrying a leather portfolio. She was clearly a real estate professional, but not Brenda's current agent. This visitor was about to change everything. The woman stepping out of the silver BMW was tall, impeccably dressed, and moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to closing million-dollar deals. She wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her silver hair was styled in a way that suggested both professionalism and authority. I was watering my own garden when she arrived, but I had a clear view of Brenda's driveway. Through my kitchen window, I watched Brenda emerge from her house looking puzzled and slightly panicked. She was still wearing the gardening clothes from our weekend transformation project. The conversation between them was animated but too distant for me to hear. After about 10 minutes, both women disappeared into Brenda's backyard. I continued my morning routine, but my curiosity was definitely piqued. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. Brenda stood on my porch alongside the mystery woman, both wearing expressions I couldn't quite read. "Helen?" Brenda said, her voice containing an odd mixture of excitement and disbelief. "This is Victoria Sterling from Sterling Luxury Properties. She'd like to speak with both of us." Victoria Sterling extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Ms. Rodriguez, I presume. I've heard quite a bit about you this morning. Would you mind if we sat down for a few minutes? I have a rather unusual situation to discuss." We settled around my kitchen table, and Victoria opened her leather portfolio with practiced efficiency. "Ladies, I'm going to be direct because that's how I conduct business. I represent a client who's been monitoring real estate activity in Willow Creek Estates for the past 6 months. He's particularly interested in properties that demonstrate innovative outdoor living concepts." She pulled out a photograph that made my stomach drop. It was an aerial shot of our neighborhood, clearly taken from a drone, with both my garden and Brenda's newly transformed backyard prominently featured. My client noticed the dramatic improvement to Ms. Whitman's property over the weekend. When I investigated further, I discovered that Ms. Rodriguez was instrumental in the transformation. That's when things became very interesting. Victoria turned to a new page in her portfolio. "Ms. Whitman, your house has been on the market for 8 months with multiple price reductions. Based on standard market analysis, it should have sold months ago at a lower price point. However, after seeing your backyard transformation, my client believes your property now has significantly enhanced value." Brenda leaned forward. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying my client would like to make an offer on your house. Full asking price of $445,000, cash purchase, 30-day closing." The silence in my kitchen was deafening. Brenda's face went white, then flushed bright red. "Full asking price?" she whispered. "Cash?" "That's correct, but there are conditions."
Victoria flipped to another document. First, the sale is contingent on your property maintaining its current landscaping configuration. Second, my client would like to hire Ms. Rodriguez as a consultant to implement similar outdoor improvements on 2 additional properties he's considering in this neighborhood. I felt like I'd been hit by lightning. I'm sorry, what? Victoria smiled for the first time since arriving. Ms. Rodriguez, my client is a real estate developer who specializes in sustainable community improvements. He's been looking for someone who understands how to create outdoor spaces that genuinely enhance property values rather than just following generic landscaping trends. She placed a business proposal in front of me. He's prepared to offer you $15,000 per property to design and oversee similar transformations, with potential for ongoing consulting work as his projects expand. Brenda found her voice first. Who is your client? Why is he interested in our neighborhood? His name is David Chen. He's Marcus Chen's younger brother, actually. He's been watching how HOA policies affect property values in planned communities, and your recent conflict over gardening regulations caught his attention.
My mind reeled. Marcus Chen, our HOA president, had a brother in real estate development who'd been monitoring our garden dispute? Victoria continued, David believes that communities thrive when residents are empowered to improve their properties creatively rather than being restricted by overly conservative covenants. Your situation provided a perfect case study. So he's been watching us this whole time? I asked. Not watching specifically, but monitoring real estate trends and community dynamics. When the HOA hearing made local real estate news— Wait, Brenda interrupted. Our HOA hearing made the news? Victoria nodded. The Phoenix Business Journal ran a small piece about evolving HOA policies and property values. Your case was mentioned as an example of how communities are adapting to changing buyer preferences. That's when David became interested. She turned back to her portfolio. The aerial photos were taken this morning after he saw the dramatic improvement to Miss Whitman's property. He immediately instructed me to make contact. Brenda was staring at the purchase offer like it might disappear if she blinked. Is this real? You're serious about buying my house? Completely serious. David has already arranged financing verification. We can close in 30 days if you accept. I studied the consulting proposal, trying to process this surreal turn of events. What kind of properties would I be working on? Initially, 2 homes in this neighborhood have been on the market for extended periods. If those transformations are successful, David has projects in 3 other planned communities where similar approaches might be beneficial. The scope of what Victoria was describing was staggering. What had started as a personal conflict over my vegetable garden was potentially launching a consulting business I'd never imagined. I need to ask, I said carefully, is this legitimate? Because this feels almost too good to be true. Victoria reached into her jacket and pulled out a business card along with what appeared to be a certified check. Miss Whitman, this is a good faith deposit of $25,000. If you accept our offer, this applies to your sale price. If you decline, you keep it as compensation for the time we've spent today. Brenda stared at the check like it was written in a foreign language. Keep it? Even if I don't sell? David believes in compensating people fairly for their time and consideration. You've already improved your property significantly, which benefits the entire neighborhood. That has value regardless of whether we complete a transaction. I had to admit, this level of professionalism suggested legitimacy, but the timing still seemed almost impossibly convenient. Can I ask why the rush? I inquired. Why make an offer today instead of going through normal channels? Victoria's expression became more serious. Because David's research suggests that properties with innovative outdoor features sell quickly once buyers recognize their value. He doesn't want to risk losing this opportunity to conventional market forces. She gathered her documents. I'm going to leave these proposals with both of you. Take the evening to consider them. I'll return tomorrow at 2 p.m. for your decisions. After Victoria left, Brenda and I sat in stunned silence, staring at the papers scattered across my kitchen table. Helen, Brenda said finally,
What just happened? I think, I replied slowly, we accidentally started a business. Brenda laughed, a sound that held equal parts hysteria and relief. 3 days ago, I was trying to get your garden removed by the HOA. Now, someone wants to pay you to design more gardens and buy my house for full price because of what we built together? It is pretty surreal. She picked up the good faith check again, examining it like she was checking for forgeries. This amount would cover my mortgage payments for 8 months. Even if I don't sell to them, this buys me time to figure out my next steps. Are you going to accept their offer? Brenda was quiet for a long moment. Helen, can I tell you something? Yesterday, working in that yard with you was the first time I felt genuinely productive since my divorce. Not just busy, but actually creating something worthwhile. If selling my house means you get to help other people have that same experience, she trailed off, but I understood what she was trying to say.
The question now was whether we were about to make the smartest decision of our lives or walk into something that was too good to be true. That evening, Brenda and I sat on her newly transformed patio, surrounded by the plants we'd installed just days earlier. The desert marigolds were already beginning to bloom, and the herbs filled the air with their fragrant scents. It was hard to believe this was the same dead space that had existed less than a week ago. I keep reading this offer over and over, Brenda said, holding Victoria's documents under the patio light. Full asking price, cash, 30-day closing. 6 months ago, this would have solved every problem in my life. And now? She gestured around the transformed yard. Now I'm not sure I want to leave. For the first time since Mark moved out, this place feels like home again. I understood her conflicted feelings, but I also knew she couldn't afford to keep the house long term. Brenda, you said to yourself that the mortgage payments are unsustainable. This offer gives you the financial freedom to start over somewhere more affordable. I know you're right. It's just... She paused, touching one of the tomato plants. I never thought I could create something like this. What if I move somewhere new and can't recreate it? Then you hire a consultant who specializes in outdoor transformations, I said with a smile. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus Chen knocked on my door at 8 a.m., wearing an expression that mixed embarrassment with curiosity. Helen, I hope you don't mind the early visit. I heard about my brother's offer yesterday, and I wanted to speak with you before Victoria returns. We sat on my front porch, overlooking the garden that had started this entire saga. My tomatoes were thriving, the peppers were producing beautifully, and the whole space looked even better than when I'd first planted it. Davy called me last night, Marcus began. He wanted to understand the background of your HOA situation before moving forward with his proposals. And what did you tell him? Marcus smiled ruefully, that you were absolutely right about everything. The property value benefits, the community standards argument, even the precedent concerns. Your approach has been vindicated completely. He pulled out his phone and showed me a real estate app. 3 houses in our neighborhood have gone under contract in the past week. The listing agents are specifically mentioning community gardening trends and sustainable lifestyle features in their marketing materials. Because of my garden? Because of the conversation your garden started. Buyers are driving through Willow Creek Estates specifically to see examples of creative landscaping. Your property and Brenda's transformation have become selling points for the entire neighborhood. This was a development I hadn't anticipated. Our personal conflict had somehow elevated the entire community's marketability. Marcus, can I ask you something? Did you know David was monitoring our neighborhood? He nodded sheepishly. He mentioned he was researching HOA policies and property values in planned communities, but I had no idea he was specifically watching your situation until yesterday. Are you okay with him making offers to residents? I imagine some HOA boards might see that as outside interference. Honestly, Helen, if David's investments help property values and reduce neighbor conflicts, the board supports it completely. We've learned that overly restrictive covenants can hurt communities more than they help. At 2 p.m. sharp, Victoria Sterling returned, this time accompanied by a man in his 40s wearing jeans and a polo shirt.
He looked remarkably like Marcus, but with a more relaxed demeanor. "Ladies, I'd like you to meet David Chen," Victoria announced as we gathered again in my kitchen. David's handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Miss Rodriguez, Miss Whitman, thank you for considering my proposals. I know the timing seems sudden, but I've learned that good opportunities require quick action." "Mr. Chen," Brenda said, "before we discuss anything else, I need to understand why you're really interested in our properties. The explanation Victoria gave yesterday seems almost too convenient." David laughed appreciatively. "Direct questions deserve direct answers. I've been developing sustainable communities for 8 years, focusing on places where residents can live more self-sufficiently. Your garden dispute caught my attention because it highlighted how outdated HOA policies can prevent exactly the kind of improvements that modern buyers want."
He opened his laptop and showed us a presentation filled with before and after photos of other neighborhoods he'd worked in. Traditional suburban landscaping is expensive to maintain, environmentally wasteful, and offers no practical benefits to residents. But most people don't know how to create alternatives, and many communities actively discourage experimentation. "So you're looking for demonstration projects?" I asked. "Exactly. Properties that prove sustainable landscaping can be both beautiful and valuable. Your collaboration has created a perfect model for what's possible when neighbors work together instead of against each other." Victoria opened her portfolio again. "We've revised our proposals based on yesterday's conversations." She slid new documents across the table. Brenda's sale offer remained the same, but my consulting contract had expanded significantly. "We're now offering $25,000 per property transformation, with a guaranteed minimum of 5 properties over the next 6 months. Additionally, we'd like to retain you as an ongoing consultant for community education programs." The numbers were staggering. What had started as a vegetable garden hobby could become a legitimate business generating 6-figure annual income. "There's one more component," David added. "We'd like to document your collaboration as a case study for HOA policy reform. Your experience demonstrates how communities benefit when residents are empowered to improve their properties creatively." Brenda looked at me across the table. "Helen, I think we need to accept these offers." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. This house gave me a fresh start when I needed it most. Now it's time to give someone else that same opportunity while I find something more suitable for my current situation." I studied the consulting contract one more time. The scope of work was exciting: designing sustainable landscapes, teaching gardening workshops, and helping communities update their covenants to support resident creativity rather than restrict it. "David, if I accept this consulting position, what happens to my own garden? I still want to live here and continue growing my own vegetables." "Your garden becomes the permanent demonstration site. Part of the consulting fee includes maintaining and expanding it as a teaching laboratory." 2 hours later, we'd signed contracts that would change both our lives completely. Brenda would be moving to a charming townhouse in Scottsdale that cost half her current mortgage payments. I would be launching a consulting business that combined my love of gardening with meaningful income. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, during the neighborhood's first annual Garden Tour and Education Day. 23 residents participated, showcasing everything from herb gardens to native plant installations to creative water conservation systems. Brenda, who had delayed her move to help organize the event, stood next to me as families walked through yards that had been transformed from generic suburban spaces into productive, beautiful landscapes. "You know what the best part is?" she said, watching a group of children harvest cherry tomatoes from Mrs. Patterson's new raised beds. "What's that?" 6 months ago, I thought success meant keeping everything exactly the same. Now I realize it means helping everything grow. The garden that had nearly destroyed our neighborhood relationship had instead become the foundation for something neither of us could have imagined. Sometimes the best transformations begin with conflict, continue with collaboration, and end with community. As the sun set over Willow Creek Estates, I stood in my expanded vegetable garden, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, planning projects that would benefit communities across Arizona.
My Cherokee purple tomatoes were the largest I'd ever grown, and they'd never tasted sweeter. The HOA complaint that Brenda filed against my garden had indeed changed property values in our neighborhood, just not in the way she'd expected. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.